Hi, and welcome to Practical Ideas for Growth. I'm Sarah Dobek, our president and founder of Inovautus Consulting. And I'm joined today by one of my colleagues, Christian Moises. Welcome, Christian.
Hey, Sarah, glad to be here.
Thanks. We are talking market research today. And market research is something that's near and dear to our hearts. This is something that we spend a lot of time doing for our clients, but often one of those things that I think is and can be misconstrued. Where do we use market research? How does that play into some of what firms are doing today? We use this term a lot around here, which is these graying of geographic boundaries. And just because a firm can be in another market doesn't mean that they should be. So we're here to talk about all things market research today, at least for the 17 or so minutes that we've got, and explore this a little bit. But Christian, I know we use this in a lot of areas, but I think a lot of firms kind of wonder, where does market research come into play? Like where and how are we using this, or how are we seeing firms use market research? What are some of the things that you're seeing?
I think one of the things is a lot of firms, and this is just human nature. I want to do that. I want to go there because I've heard it's great. And that's a great way to start, right? Like, oh, we hear that, construction is great in Florida because so many people are moving there. But there's so much more when you start to peel the layers of that onion back. So, where does market research really come in? A lot of times when we're talking with firms, they've identified what industry they want to go to or what market they want to be in, uh, but they haven't done the research yet. They haven't really dug into that market. And again, there's so many layers to peel back on. So, like on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd probably put market research at a 2 because that's how important it is and how much market research and that data will actually drive your strategy.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of firms come to us when they're trying to figure out where to niche, right? A lot of firms end up with a collection of clients, and sometimes there's patterns in those client bases. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes they're truly generalists, and they know that in order to take that next leap and to start to be more competitive at the size firm that they're at, that they really truly have to niche. And we believe here at Inovautus, niching is not just about like where you have a collection of clients, and one niche is not made up of one client who generates a lot of money for the firm. There's a combination of things that come into play. On the internal side, it's passion and interest. We have to have leaders that want to do it. But on the external side, there has to be a market for that. You should be in a growing market. There should be consideration about the economic resiliency. We should be looking at the competitive landscape. And so I know that we spend a lot of time helping firms understand that external piece and guiding them through how they can evaluate that internal piece
Yeah,
on market research.
it's huge. I mean, and we could talk the whole time on just the internal component of that.
Mhm.
We talk about the internal just because you have 150,000 in revenue in your quote unquote construction niche. To your point, is that from one client? Is it from a collection of clients? What do those clients look like? And that drives also when you're going internally, identifying, you know, do we have something here or is this a one-off client? Do we really have the expertise and the bench and the knowledge to support that particular industry or service line niche?
Yeah, or the ability to build it too. The other place that we see, and obviously market research comes up a lot in either niching strategies or expansion, but we're also using it heavily in brand strategy, right? If a firm is expanding well beyond their market, or maybe they're already there, but that's not how they're going to market. If they're repositioning themselves, maybe their positioning doesn't accurately reflect where they're at right now. We see research as a core piece of that brand strategy and positioning. It's one of the elements. It's not the only element that comes into play. But the other place that we see it is M&A strategy. We're running into that a lot more, where firms are wanting to really target who is it that they're going to go after if they have an M&A strategy. And market research can play a really big role in helping to identify the right candidates before we start reaching out and really narrowing down that list. There's a lot of information that's already available that can be utilized.
Yeah, I think you say this in almost every LinkedIn live you do. And I think COVID and the graying of geographic boundaries in this remote environment that we now live in and will continue to live in has just made market research that much more important. Before you were probably researching, your 10 county area or even just your state or maybe into your neighboring state. But now you're researching the whole country, right? Like those boundaries are gone. They've always been gone. We're just now realizing that they're gone. So market research, setting your strategy and deciding where you're going to go. I'm going to move it up to a 1.5 on the scale of where it fits into where you develop.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times we think of market research, right, as it's a numbers game. And while there's a lot of numbers involved in that, I don't think it's always just as easy as dumping those numbers into Excel. You got to know what you're doing with those. And we're always big believers and proponents, I know, of like, what are the questions that we want this to answer? What's the research? What's our hypothesis, right? Or what are we trying to validate? And so I know that we often ask this, but there's some obvious things that we would expect leaders to want answers to, but then there's some not so obvious things. What are some of the not so obvious things that Christian, you've seen with as we've worked through some of these projects that some people might not be considering when they look at market research?
Well, again, when you look at the writing and geographic boundaries, we do live in a remote world, but we know that accounting and advisory is still so human to human. There's such that personal factor. If anything, that's become even more front and center. So one of the more unique things I think that we look at is when we're doing market research, putting a filter on from a travel distance. How many nonstop flights are there? Do you want to fly 3 hours or more, 3 hours or less? How many flights a day are coming out of your home office to where the markets that you're looking to expand into? Cultural preference. If you're targeting a specific culture or a specific segment of the community, looking at those preferences. Economic reports, we talked a little bit about that, but that's huge too, because again, you can get the numbers. You can get that there's 5,000 construction firms in Montana, but is Montana great for construction? Just because there's businesses there doesn't mean that there is enough of a business environment to support the growth there. We could go on and on. You look at the competitive analysis. How many competing firms are based in Montana? How many other outside firms are also operating in Montana supporting those construction clients? So the list goes on and on and on. But again, too, when you look at the markets, and this gets into real specialized niche segmentation, niche focus. But you look at construction, that's great. But then you get into the subcontractor world, and then you have HVAC, you have windows, you have gutters. I'm getting real focused here. But that's really where your sweet spot is. And I think that ties into something we'll talk about, which is market share versus market size. Those are some of the really areas that you want to think about. How far down do you want to travel?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're breaking up just a little bit, so I'm going to take over part of this conversation and hope that that we get some of your internet back. But what I heard you say is market share and market size, and I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, other than being able to answer big questions, a few of the other things that we really like to account for in that, and we encourage firms to look at in their analysis is, what is that potential market size? You raised this earlier, Christian, and we say this a lot, right? We want to know that where we're going, there's actually a market. And so many times we'll hear clients set minimums on, for example, size of company. Right? I want to be working with a $10 million company or a $15 million company or a $5 million company. And sometimes the market is there and sometimes it's not. Right? And so part of the research and the value of the research is being able to validate, well, what size is that market? We say here quite a bit, you're never going to have 100% market share. You'd be lucky to have 60% market share. And usually when you start hitting that 40 to 50% mark, it's time to start looking at how you're going to expand your strategy. But if you have no idea how much of that market you have, then it's really hard to do that. And that's market share, right? So it's super simple math, like how many prospects in that size that are ideal for you, how many of them do you have? right now. And that's the very basic level. You could get even more detailed to say, well, what am I doing for those clients and what does that potentially look like? And that can be a much more granular analysis, but we've got to start to look at market share and what we have, because it should be driving our strategy to expand or where we focus. And then what happens in those markets when we do broach what we think will be the majority of market share that we have. How are we going to continue to expand? Is that going to be through other services? Are we going to just maintain in that market? We use maintain versus grow quite a bit, here with our clients, but all things that we have to consider and something that should be part of your market analysis.
And you just hit on a future LinkedIn topic, LinkedIn Live topic, I think we should address, which is a firm says we want to grow in construction. But when we go to market share, we realize they already have 40% of the market. There's not much more growth potential there for them, depending on what revenue band that they're looking at. So the reason I was so happy to hear you say it, and I know we preach this all the time, which is, well, it may not be necessarily you're growing in number of clients, but you're growing in the expansion of clients. And again, you know what? There's market research opportunities there too. If you're a construction tax firm, start doing the research on how many construction companies need that audit component, how many need the outsourced controller or CFO. And there's so many sites and so many technologies that will allow you to dig into the information and find that data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll tell you that the data analysis piece of this is sometimes the most beneficial thing we hear from our clients. They haven't always looked at their data in the way that we present it and analyze it. And so for some firms, this is the first time they're seeing it. They have a gut reaction. They say, this is what feels right. Or they've maybe done their own rudimentary analysis of a portion of their client base, but not always from the same data set that we might be working from. And so we're usually hearing like validation, like this is right on point, or there's some surprises in there. I love doing the client heat maps, especially when we're working with firms that are expanding beyond their initial office locations. It's always interesting because it's always a little eye-opening for them to see where they have clients, how many they have in other states or other locations, that without looking at that global picture, they know their client base, but they don't necessarily know the entire firms. And that's been a really powerful thing that we've done for them.
Yeah,
I know go ahead.
I was going to say, it's human nature. We think we know everything, right? But sometimes when you have a third party look at it and you're like, oh, well, we thought we had a huge concentration in Virginia. And really, you have one client that is the bulk of your revenue there. It's so interesting when you look at those numbers and the numbers tell the story.
Yeah. Well, the other piece of that is important is there's got to be a trend line. So oftentimes we're looking at not a year of data, we're looking at a minimum of 5 years of data because we want to see how something is growing or declining. And it is very insightful sometimes to see how something has grown naturally without a lot of intention or effort, or how it's declined naturally without a lot of intention or effort. And that can often inform decision-making for firms in deciding what they want to invest in, what they really want to grow in, and what that looks like. It's also been extremely helpful, I think, as firms are trying to right now manage their existing growth. What types of clients do we want to be serving? What is right for our firm? How do we handle this overcapacity, this over demand of services right now with not enough supply apparently in the profession because of the people shortage? And that data is filtering in and into a lot of these conversations to help them make more effective decisions around some of this.
Yeah, and to your point, we talked about a little bit ago with the, really drilling down into specialization. I used a subcontractor example, may not be the best, but to that point, a lot of people are like, well, I have competitors here, I have competitors there. Well, the market research is going to drive where maybe you can find where there's fewer competitors or no competitors. And those numbers will speak out, whether you're looking, at your NAICS codes research, you're looking at your client revenue research internally, if you're looking at, the revenue bands from the data research. So lots of different ways to really kind of hone in. And then what's always fun is when you get all that data, look at it, analyze it, and then pick, we're going to go here, and then start building that strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super fun. We're data nerds, and we like it. And to quote one of our clients the other day, and we totally relate to this. She was geeking out on the data that we were able to provide. To that point, like just hadn't seen the firm's data in that way. Very reputable marketing professional and everything, but we love it too because we geek out on it, and we love to see the data tell the story and then dig into that story a little bit more and hear the rest of it. It really starts some good conversations sometimes. But we've only got a couple minutes left, and so I thought I'd leave our audience with just a few tips and tools, right? If you're looking to do this in your own firm, I thought, Christian, we could share a couple of the, high level resources, the types of things that we look at. That's different for every engagement. We literally put together a plan, a research plan for each of our engagements that we do on this. But maybe you can share a few, and I'll share a few of the types of things that we sometimes look at when we're doing market research.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it goes back to NAICS codes, and that's the real easy way to do it. But sometimes NAICS codes can get a little messy, so you have to make sure you're doing your research to then research. But you got ZoomInfo, which is a great software to use. There's Hoover's, there's RelPro. A lot of times, though, when we really want to get granular into a market, we'll look at local business journals. Almost every business journal, I think they all do the book of lists, or they have their industry lists. Association directories are great. A lot of those are free online. Sometimes, depending on how bad you want to get into a particular market or niche, pay for the membership, pay for the download of their membership directory. A lot of times Google research. We'd say we Google everything today, right? But if you're looking for a Japanese concentration, there's Japanese chambers everywhere. It's just, we have so many resources at our fingertips, literally with the internet. Just play around and find what's going to work for you. But you'll be amazed at how many of those association, either nonprofits or industry associations or state associations, can provide that feedback.
Yeah. The other one I rely heavily on, there are industry reports as well for some of these subsectors that you mentioned as example, but lots of them. And those can be really great resources. You can go buy them ad hoc. You can get a decent membership. So First Research, Vertical IQ, IBIS World. These are just a few examples of some of the places you can go to get detailed industry reports. And they have a ton of information that they've already compiled for you around that. And the other is almost every state has some level of economic reports, and sometimes multiple economic reports. And that's more at a state level, that's identifying what the state is interested in, how the state itself is doing in particular areas, what their growth looks like, and in what sectors that's showing up in. And those things can be super powerful to guiding some of that direction as you begin to work on it. So.
Yeah, it goes back to that Montana example of, you may have the numbers in Montana, but does the economic study support growth of the construction sector in that particular state? And that report will tell you one way or another.
And just to be clear to all the audience, we have no opinions on Montana because it's a beautiful state. We were just thinking on a state in any industry in regards to that. But, well, Christian, I know we are out of time. Thank you so much for having this conversation around market research. And thank you to our listeners. Hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at any time. But thank you.
Thank you.